Well, friends, welcome to our last Ventures course of this semester. And we're looking forward to having Dr. Steve Schweitzer present with us. And I can see now that Sharon has gotten connected and can hear us, right, Sharon?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Oh, great.
Great. So before I introduce Steve, though, who's going to be leading us tonight, you have the privilege of being at probably one of our most cutting edge courses, as Steve is taking really contemporary media and applying that. So, Steve, we're expecting to have a lot of fun tonight. As I said, this will be the last course of this semester, but for those of you who don't know, we've been doing 6 to 8 courses a year with Ventures. And so we have a library of 60 courses that we're still working on putting online for you to be able to access. And look forward to the next 6 courses that we're starting to put together for next academic year. So look for information starting in the fall. We'll be sharing that. We don't have anything nailed down quite yet, but we've got a lot of intriguing possibilities. So I think you'll be delighted. But for now, I'm looking forward to time with Steve. And so for those of you that don't know him, Steve Schweitzer is the academic dean and professor at Bethany Theological Seminary. I had the privilege of being one of the faculty when Steve actually started at Bethany, so I've appreciated all that he's brought to the table. Steve completed his PhD at University of Notre Dame in 2005, or Notre Dame for those of us in this country. Taught Old Testament at Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary, and then came to Bethany in 2009. He teaches a seminar on Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah, Esther. Well, take the Esther off of that. The books of the Bible just keep running out of my mouth.
So it's right off your tongue, yeah.
Yes. And a course on science fiction and theology, which is where we find ourselves today. His book, Reading Utopia in Chronicles, published in 2007, and essays and articles address a wide range of topics related to Chronicles in particular. Steve and his wife, Jill, have 3 children. They attended Prince of Peace Church of the Brethren in South Bend, Indiana for 9 years before they came to Richmond, Indiana to come to Bethany, and they currently attend Cedar Grove Church of the Brethren in the Southern Ohio, Kentucky district. Steve, anything else that I should have added?
No, I think that sounds pretty good. I mean, that's pretty accurate.
Then you can
There are
add
other things that come up along the way.
Yeah, please do, and I'll just turn it over to you.
Very good. Thank you so much, Enton. It is great to be with all of you. See several familiar faces on the screen here. So good to connect back with some friends that I haven't seen in a while. So this is good. Pleased to be with you tonight as we talk about Black Panther and thinking about the ways in which both of the films operate as a metaphor for us. So I'm going to just do a quick poll here so that I have a sense of your familiarity with the material. And so those of you who can just give me a quick hands up. We have 3 categories, and I want to do each film separately. So the first Black Panther film, how many of you have seen it only once? One time. Okay, how many of you have seen it exactly 2 times? Okay, and how many of you have seen it multiple times? How many of you have not seen it? Okay, so I warn you, there will be spoilers. It's unavoidable at this point. Okay, all right, second film, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. How many of you have seen it exactly once? Okay, how many of you have seen it twice? How many of you have seen it multiple times? All right, and how many of you have not seen Black Panther, Wakanda Forever? Yeah, it's a bit newer. Okay, so again, there will be spoilers, and so I apologize in advance for some of that, but it also may make you want to go watch the film again and dig deep, more deeply. My students in the science fiction class, and Alan was one of those who took that course from me along the way. I have had complaints that I have ruined movie going for students forever because they cannot sit in a theater and not ask questions. about what they're watching. It's hard to just enjoy stuff exploding when you're having all these theological questions in your head as you're watching something. So hopefully that I don't ruin movie going for you, but hopefully it will cause you to ask deeper questions. And I like to say to pay attention to the theology that is all around us. There is theology all around us. And so looking at something like Black Panther and Black Panther Wakanda Forever as an example, as an entry point into a larger conversation, I think is worthwhile. And certainly as we try to connect with culture, as we think about what it means for us to be the church today, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which we'll talk about it in a second, is filled with theological claims and questions and dispositions. And so I think we should engage that conversation because people are engaged in that conversation well beyond the walls of the church. So there's my opening spiel. So I'd like us, I'm going to use a PowerPoint here for a second and run through some basic information about both Black Panther films. I'm going to do some talking about them, their themes, that sort of thing. And then at that point, pause once sort of I give you the overview of both films and some other background stuff. Then I will pause for some questions and then see where we're at on time. And then I have some breakout things planned for you all, and then take a break and then come back. So we'll see exactly how that timeline works for our time together, but we're going to do some content delivery here first to be followed by some questions. So let me share my screen. Okay, and hopefully you all can now see the slide there with me in the upper right-hand corner. Everybody got that?
Looks
Hopefully.
good, Steve.
All right. Okay, so Black Panther as metaphor, lessons about race, colonialism, violence, and identity in Wakanda. And we could add a number of themes, but the title seems to capture most of those dominant themes throughout the films, and both films in particular. It's interesting to think about how the themes that show up in one film are then continued into the second film. So some basic information. The original Black Panther film from 2018 is part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU for short. And that is from phase 3. In that section of the MCU, the first 3 phases, there were like 23 films, and Black Panther was number 18 of the 23. And so it was well into the process of the MCU that began with like Iron Man back in 2008, something like that. And so over a period of about a decade, a little more than a decade, 23 films were released for these first 3 phases. And so they come at things from a variety of angles, and Black Panther comes in towards the end of phase 3, just before the culmination of that part of the MCU. Black Panther was incredibly successful. It grossed over $1.3 billion at the box office, and so it was a big hit. It's often promoted as, sort of the first Black-led superhero movie. That's not true. There were previous Black superhero movies before this, but it certainly has a dominantly Black cast, and it is clearly the most successful of all those films that privileged Black actors, actresses, and even throughout the entire staff and crew and production team that made up the Black Panther film. So lots of celebration around this particular film as being a success, particularly for African-American moviegoers and production. Where it fits within the 23 films, it comes after the film Captain America Civil War, which is sort of a breaking point in the MCU, where the superheroes fight against each other over who will have authority over them. And in that particular film, the character Black Panther is first introduced. So before we have the standalone film, the character Black Panther appears in Captain America Civil War, with the Black Panther's father, King T'Chaka, being murdered as he's at a conference of the UN. And that murder then is part of the rift that comes up among the superheroes in the film, with the Black Panther character, T'Challa, hunting down the individual who's being framed for the death of his father. And so a lot of the themes that we see in the Black Panther film in 2018 deal with how the Black Panther is dealing with the grief over the loss of his father. Since his father has died, that means now he, T'Challa, is going to become king of this nation of Wakanda. So what does it mean to succeed this father? There certainly is some idolization of his father in the film and the ancestors in general. And so, when your father is martyred right in front of you, and so that's the situation that we find T'Challa in. And so he has to overcome his own predisposition to think his father was perfect, right, in all that he did, unquestioned what it is that Wakanda was doing because of his father's leadership. So that's sort of the event that happens, this instigating event in Captain America: Civil War, where we're first introduced to the character Black Panther in the MCU. Black Panther also comes before these two major films, Infinity War and Endgame. And if you know the MCU, this is the culmination of Phase 3, in which Thanos shows up and tries to gather the Infinity Stones, and then wants to basically remove half of the population of the universe because there's limited resources. And so the Avengers and all the other superheroes are trying to stop this from happening. And the Black Panther is one of those individuals near the end of Endgame that comes back to assist in the fight against Thanos. And so this original Black Panther film is part of this ongoing what's called the Infinity Stone saga, that takes up the first three phases of the MCU. And many would say that the Black Panther film is the best film in the entire first three phases of the MCU for its themes, its portrayal of African and African American culture, and all these different pieces that we find in the film. So a rousing success with the Black Panther film. Before we talk a little bit about Wakanda Forever, some very important things happen that change Wakanda Forever. And I'll just be referring to the second film as Wakanda Forever, not as Black Panther Wakanda Forever. So Wakanda Forever, because it happens after Endgame, we don't know what would have happened if Thanos had not shown up and half the world's population would have disappeared. We don't know what Wakanda would have been like without the blip, what it's called in the MCU. And so when we enter Wakanda Forever, that particular storyline comes after the events of Endgame, which is really important for the overall plot and sort of the world's quest to restore itself and to fight off these threats that are not just existential, but cataclysmic. And so the fact that Wakanda has this particular resource, vibranium, that everybody wants, then becomes a source of tension. And so without the events of Endgame happening, it would be very interesting to see how Wakanda Forever would have played out if Black Panther 2 had been released hypothetically before the events of Endgame. But that's a hypothetical. Secondly, the other hypothetical is that the actor who played T'Challa, the Black Panther in the first Black Panther film, was dying while he filmed the Black Panther film of cancer, and eventually died very tragically. And so they had to really be careful about what they did with the character Black Panther and Black Panther Wakanda Forever, because of the tremendous job that I'm just totally blanked on his name. Chadwick, why can't I think of his last name? That Chadwick had played so well in the first Black Panther film. And so the opening scenes of Wakanda Forever are a funeral for T'Challa, the Black Panther character, but also stand in as a mourning over the loss of Chadwick Boseman, who played T'Challa in the original film. And you're talking about people just crying in the theater during the funeral scenes in Wakanda Forever, knowing how much they loved this particular actor. And again, how different this second film would have been if Chadwick had actually lived, instead of dying, would have changed the entire plot of this second film. The second film did well. It's part of phase 4 and is the final film in phase 4 before the start of phase 5, which just started with the new release of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. So Black Panther: Wakanda Forever has finished phase 4, and now phase 5 has just started. And so it culminates part of this phase 4, and it did well at the box office, grossing $859 million, but not quite as much as the original film did. And it certainly did not get quite the praise of the reviews as the original Black Panther film did. It's very good, very interesting film. I really enjoyed it, but it's hard to top what was done in Black Panther. And so again, the dates here, you have the 2018 Black Panther film, and there are certain comments in the Black Panther film from 2018 that certainly echo or riff on the situation during the Trump era that are sort of hinted at or not so hinted at in that process. And then now in Wakanda Forever, it sort of is the aftermath of how do we go forward? What do we do with this in our present situation? And so the dating of the films, I think, is also important to the conversation. So it's really important for both of these films to think about them as sort of a part 1, part 2 in the storyline. So they are independent films, but the second film continues the plot line, obviously, but not without the rest of the context of the MCU. Maybe I will pause there for a second and see if there's any questions. Okay, hearing none and seeing none. So this is a promotional poster from the first Black Panther film, and you can see several of the main characters there. T'Challa, Black Panther in the center, and then on the one side, Nakia, his love interest and also a spy. His sister right below my hand here, Shuri, who's the genius with the technology. She's been called the smartest person in the entire MCU. So here you have this young Black woman who outthinks Tony Stark, is smarter than Banner, Bruce Banner with his 7 degrees. At one point, is, well, why didn't you think of that? Well, we didn't think of that, but Shuri did. So there's something about having this intelligent Black woman in this particular role that is important to the overall storytelling. And of course, Angela Bassett, who plays the Queen Mother, Ramonda, there, and her character plays a dominant role in Wakanda Forever, dealing with the aftermath of T'Challa's death. On the other side of the Black Panther, you have Okoye, who's the general of the Dora Milaje, which is the armed forces of Wakanda. They're all female warrior group, right? Like these are the special forces that go out, and so it's all female there. And then Claw, who's one of the villains in the film. Oh man, sorry, just drawing a blank. Andy Serkis plays him, and he's just a mercenary who's out to get the money for the vibranium that he's trying to sell. Wakabe there on the bottom, who's the love interest of Okoye. The scene that they have, of course, where she chooses Wakanda over her lover, is very important. And then to the far left, Killmonger, Eric Stevens, played by Michael B. Jordan. It would be wrong to call him the villain of the film. He's definitely the antagonist in the film. And of course, the views on what Wakanda should be doing is intentionally contrasted between Killmonger and T'Challa as the Black Panther. It's important to note a couple things in this, that Killmonger and the character Eric Stevens there is the only real African American in the film, except for the opening scenes in LA. And so the absence of African American films more towards like British actors, but also just that even Chadwick Boseman, who plays T'Challa, uses a different accent, right? The only African American representation we see in the film is one of marginalization, even within the African and African diaspora settings of the film. So that's just many critics have pointed this out of the film. This is a poster then for the second film, Wakanda Forever. There in the center with all the feathers is the main antagonist of the film, Namor. or Namor, as it's pronounced both ways in the comics and both ways in the film. He is Mesoamerican Mayan descent and wants Wakanda to join him in a battle against the surface world in a preemptive strike, essentially, to prevent the surface world from taking over vibranium and from pillaging his land of Talokan. And so he wants Wakanda to join them against the surface world. And you can see again the main characters there from Wakanda on the bottom across it. And the purples and blues are these characteristic colors that we see associated with the Black Panther, wearing my purple shirt tonight to make sure that we honor the Black Panther here. So some selected themes. So colonialism and responsibility. So in one sense, Wakanda, this fictional nation in Africa, is a symbol, a metaphor for what Africa could have been, might have been, without colonial intervention, without the European nations coming in and taking the resources and carving up the land, so that the nation of Wakanda is completely isolated from the rest of the world in terms of external interference and knowledge. And so it grows hugely in terms of technology on this resource vibranium without the interference and particularly the enslavement of Africans by the West. And so there's lots of comments in the film around issues of colonialism and the responsibility that goes with that, and how to navigate a post-colonial era, if such a thing is even possible. And so we'll watch a clip here in a little bit about that, but that's a dominant theme in the film. I remember seeing this in the theater and just wondering what everyone in the theater was thinking when these things were being raised, right? Because these are not the typical themes that you associate with a superhero action movie with lots of explosions. It's a very critical stance towards the West in this film. So that's sort of one big theme. The other big theme that is not probably as recognized, I would say, is this issue of the chosen people and what it means to be chosen. And so you have the 4 tribes within Wakanda that agree to go under the Black Panther. That's at the very beginning of the film. This is illustrated. And then the Jabari tribe that does not agree to be a part of this. And so then they separate. And so you end up with the chosen people in sort of the capital city who live more in luxury, while the Jabari live out in the mountains, much more rustic. And so even within Wakanda itself, there is a distinction between sort of those who have embraced what it means to be part of this chosenness versus those who are seen on the outside. When M'Baku shows up to challenge T'Challa for the throne, he makes statements about the king's not visiting, and this is reiterated then later in the film. And so just the ways in which the capital city, the center, has ignored the margins even within Wakanda is part of this conversation. And then, of course, the chosenness and the tension between T'Challa and Killmonger, where Killmonger's heritage is part Wakandan, and yet he is the outsider. He is the one who is abandoned. He is the one who is not taken back or saved in the introductory scene of the film. And so again, this is about the center, T'Challa, who has the power, right? He's the son of the king who will become king, versus his nephew, or excuse me, not his nephew, his cousin, Killmonger, who also is of royal blood, but because he is not raised in Wakanda, because he is not completely pure blood Wakandan, that this is part of the hierarchy, right, within the system. And so this sense of what does it mean to be part of this descent or this lineage, it's very interesting when we talk about Okoye and how she is still tied to the fact that there's a bloodline that plays such a vital role in what it means to be the Black Panther. So this idea of chosenness runs not just for Wakanda versus the world, which we'll get to in a second, but within Wakanda itself. Then if you think about this concept of the city or the country set apart, of course, it's Wakanda versus the world. It's Wakanda and the rest of the world. That Wakanda's isolationism has been the key to its survival. And as we see multiple points in the film, there's a concern in Wakanda about the external world catching up, while at the same time, their responsibility to act on behalf of those who are marginalized or oppressed, right? So Nakia wants to provide aid. They can do it better, right, than anyone else, and so they should. Whereas Wakabe is very concerned that if you let the refugees in, they bring their problems with them. And so there's no reason that they should open up Wakanda to that kind of tension, because Wakanda is a utopia, right? It is an ideal society, and we don't want to endanger that. And so Wakabe's position is that we should remain isolated, whereas Nakia, her position would be that Wakanda is strong enough to be able to take care of the world, and that they should be open themselves up and not exist in isolation. So we see this tension throughout the film. We also see a tension around what it means to look to the past and revere the past, the ancestors, the ancestral plane. Right? I already mentioned how T'Challa has this sort of hero worship of his father, and so he has to be able to stand and critique the actions of his martyred dad. And so what does that mean in terms of how you understand your past and how you got there, and then what the future should look like? So in Killmonger's vision of the future, it's sort of this role reversal where, you know, the sun will never set on the Wakandan Empire, right? So that the future is not just about a continuation of the tradition or of the past, but of actually doing things in a new way. So M'Baku, who's the head of the Jabari tribe, is very critical of Shuri, who's this technological genius but young. He critiques her for flaunting tradition, for not being concerned about the ways of the past, right? For entrusting their technology to a child. And he calls her that at one point. And so this tension that we see again, even within Wakanda, around how do you revere the past versus what the future should look like. And so Wakanda, for all of its idealism, is much more complex than it sort of first appears when you start poking at it. So that's sort of a dominant theme within the film as well. And then this, throughout the film, the concern for war, violence, and nonviolence. Lots of conversations around retribution or vengeance. As soon as they realize that that Claw, the individual who's responsible for the death of King T'Chaka, as soon as they realize they know where he is, they're going to go get him. And the Black Panther, T'Challa, almost kills him and is stopped by Okoye, right, out of vengeance. They want him dead. And then, of course, Killmonger is all about exacting vengeance for the centuries, the millennia of oppression against his people worldwide, that is the African and African diaspora. And so throughout all of this, we see this tension within the film over how does violence work, how will retribution be paid? If you have the chance to take out your enemy, shouldn't you? At one point, Wakabe talks about it will soon only be the conquerors and the conquered. And he knows which one he'd rather be, right? He'd rather be the conqueror. And so this understanding of what you do with power, right? What does power allow you to do? And so this is part of the conversation of the film. Almost all these themes are connected then directly into the second film, Wakanda Forever. This theme of colonialism continues to run through the film, where sure enough, there are nations that want the vibranium metal that is so crucial to the technology of Wakanda. And the French at the beginning of the film are implicated in trying to raid a Wakandan outreach center for that vibranium, but they're stopped by the Dora Milaje. And then as they discover vibranium in the ocean, the city of Talokan is threatened by the arrival of Americans and Navy SEALs who are trying to do this. The CIA, of course, is involved. Repeated involvement by the CIA in this particular film. The CIA are painted in both films very negatively, but extremely negatively in the second film, in Wakanda Forever. And so this continued conversation over what it means to be a part of the world, the promises that T'Challa makes at the end of the first Black Panther film about opening up Wakanda, the implications of that then are played out at the beginning of this film, where it's not just enough for them to share, but the West wants them and they're going to take them. So just like the West, the European nations pillaged Africa now the Western nations are going to go after vibranium. And so they accuse Wakanda of not sharing enough. And so because they're not sharing enough, they're going to go get what's theirs, right? That's how the film sort of opens. And so this tension that we see again in the film between what you do with your resources and how you balance that isolationism versus the involvement, what's appropriate for Wakanda to be doing. And again, in this film, in a very different way, respect for the past, but also very much about the future. So in the second film, Shuri is trying to create a synthetic heart-shaped herb that gives the Black Panther his power in order to prevent her brother from dying. That is unsuccessful at the beginning of the film. This is necessary because in the first film, Killmonger had burned all of the heart-shaped herb, so there is no more. And then in the second film, she's able finally to create this synthetic heart-shaped herb that then gives her the power of the Black Panther. And so it's produced technologically, not grown as before. We also see that this new character, Riri Williams, who is this young, gifted, and Black American woman at MIT, she is the one who actually creates the device that finds vibranium. So again, she's super smart. She's using Stark technology. She builds her own Iron Man suit within the film. She'll be known as Ironheart. And so she's exceptionally gifted within this and rivals Shuri in terms of her abilities. We have these two incredibly intelligent young women who are Black that are put forward as these geniuses within the film, often in contrast to, sort of the stupid or not as quick white agents or Western or European individuals within the film. So they're outsmarting them left and right. There's something else that I was going to say about Riri. So her character in particular sort of demonstrates what's possible when she is able to create this all on her own, using scavenged parts and other things of her own design. And so she's not simply copying what was done before, but actually taking it in a new direction, which is really fascinating to watch in the film. Then this theme of war, violence, and nonviolence that shows up in the second film, very much like the first film, because of the death of T'Challa, because of the ways in which Namor wants to fight for vengeance against those who slaughtered his ancestors. All of this is about vengeance, revenge, retribution. We have this then additional layer in Wakanda Forever of the preemptive strike. So Namor is very clear in the second film that he wants to attack the surface world before they have a chance to attack them, right? And so this is an added dimension in the second film that doesn't quite show up in the first film. So what's the role of the preemptive strike in sort of preserving your own interest, right? And so the United States has done that a few times, where we have encouraged or been a part of or even instigated preemptive strikes against nations. And so there certainly is a commentary going on here in the second film about U.S. foreign policy, just like in the first film. And then this dominant theme that we find in the second film over grief, loss, and forgiveness in particular. So with the death of Chadwick Boseman, who dies, and then the repercussions of that. And then as the film plays out, when Queen Ramonda dies at the hands of Namor, Shuri is filled with vengeance. At one point, Nakia will tell Shuri, "You can't let vengeance consume you," and her response is, "It already has." And so everything that she's doing then is to get back at Namor, because not only is she suffering the loss of her brother, but now she's suffered the loss of her mother, right? And so throughout this film, we see Shuri, who's trying to navigate this incredible intelligence and responsibility alongside what it means to grieve and to suffer loss in a very personal way. Her mother dies directly across the room from her. She can't get to her as her mother is dying. And so again, this sense of loss that we see throughout the film, and for them is the response, revenge, vengeance, or will it be forgiveness? Will she be as it's said in the film, will she be noble like her brother, like T'Challa? Will she be noble, or will she do what needs to be done? Will she take care of business like Killmonger? That becomes the contrast. Again, going back to the first film on how T'Challa would do it versus how Killmonger would do it. And Shuri has to make a choice. Will she imitate her brother, or will she imitate her cousin? And she begins by imitating her cousin. And then eventually she realizes this is the wrong thing, because her this is the big spoiler here, because her mother comes back to her from the ancestral plane and tells her, show him who you are, which is an echo of the same line from the first Black Panther film. And Shuri decides that who she really is noble like her brother. And so she's going to forgive Namor. She's going to offer peace rather than continue the bloodshed and violence that we see in the film. So in both films, the culmination of the plot lines end in not necessarily non-violence, but a rejection of violence, a rejection of the cycle of violence. And so that's an important point within both films, that the way forward is only through forgiveness, right? Is only through a second chance, another opportunity, a not wanting to continue the cycle of violence by seeking revenge. And that's true in both films. A couple other comments. There's a lot, I shouldn't say a lot. There have been a few things published recently on Black Panther. And so if you are interested in pursuing more on the film and its larger implications, I would highly recommend this particular special issue of the journal Africology, the Journal of Pan-African Studies. There you can see the date is 2018. It came out immediately when the film was released. These were like initial responses right out of the gate. And they're all the articles are available for free. You can just go to the link there, and I'll make the slides available to you, so you can just click on it and you can read a wide range of responses to the film right when it first came out. And then these other three books, Why Wakanda Matters, and then Black Panther and Philosophy. So the first book really delves into a lot of issues of identity around the film Black Panther. It's very well done book, collection of essays. And the second film is part of a series, the Blackwell Philosophy and Pop Culture series. So there's all sorts of these that are like Star Trek and philosophy, Star Wars and philosophy, The Simpsons and philosophy. And so a wide range of different books here. And this one is Black Panther and Philosophy, What Can Wakanda Offer the World, which is, of course, how the film ends. And so lots of great essays there exploring these different themes. And then very recently, we have this other book, Black Panther Dreams of Wakanda, and it's actually interviews with the production crew on Wakanda and how they made decisions like what the clothing would look like, how the art would be portrayed, the graphic design of the things. And so it delves into how Wakanda was presented within the film. And so it's a very interesting read in terms of the intentional artistic designs that went into creating this African utopia in Wakanda. And then just because I like visuals and covers, these are the covers of the four things I just referenced. Right, so you can see the Black Panther there on the Why Wakanda Matters, the movie poster on the journal, the tree for the ancestral plane on Black Panther and Wakanda, and then the Black Panther outfit that's really important in Dreams of Wakanda. And again, notice particularly on those three, the blues and the purples that we see in those covers. So I will stop there and take some questions, and then we will turn to some breakout time. So stop my share. So initial comments, questions, things you want to clarify. Yes, Tom.
I am cynical enough to ask about the sort of gap in philosophy and the gap in anyway, I'm sort of at a loss for words. When I saw the two films, I mean, I always thought, okay, this is the Marvel universe, slam bam, whatever. And then they're so thoughtful.
Mhm.
Okay. So what's the deal here? I come from a spiritual place where, I mean, I don't know how you guys feel, but I don't do Marvel universe precisely because it's so violent,
Right.
but this is thoughtful enough to the point where it is violent, but it's not violent like Terminator violence. It's violence with a point. For the rest of the universe is just like, oh well, whatever. So I mean, where do you take that?
Right. Well, and one of my fellow faculty members here, when I was talking about Black Panther, she was like, "Well, I really don't watch a lot of violence at all. Like, I intentionally avoid it." And I said, "No, I get that." I'm like, "But you need to watch this film, right? Like this film, you need to watch." And there is definitely violence, and there's more violence in the second film, I would say, than in the first film in some ways. Although when Killmonger shoots his girlfriend in cold blood, that's pretty cold. So all of the Marvel films in the MCU, let's be honest, they're there to make money, right? Like, this is Disney. This is about making money. So this is not, you're not too cynical, Tom. Okay. So yes, this is true. At the same time, it's interesting what story they tell, right? So and how they tell it. And so it's one thing to have, the gratuitous violence, and a lot of the films get pretty violent, and explosions for the sake of explosions, and it looks cool and all that, right? So that's one thing. But then you do get something like Black Panther, where not only is it a good action film, and it is a good action film, the violence does serve a purpose, and it's telling this other message, this other large, really important message. And so I don't think it's an accident that it's often regarded seriously as the best film in the MCU. Like, this is it. Like, if you polled 100 people, you're talking like 90% of them would probably say it's easily Black Panther as the best film. And some of that, I think, is Chadwick Boseman, who does an amazing job portraying this character, but the emotions that go into it, right? So you are along for the ride, emotionally, psychologically, in these two films, I would say, in a way that's not always true in some of the other films, particularly in some of the goofy films, right? It's like, I like the Ant-Man films because they're fun, right? Not because they're necessarily deep, right? So those are two different ways of thinking about the film. So for me, what's interesting is that Marvel and Disney, who owns Marvel, is telling a story about what the world could have been like without colonialism. That's worth stopping at and pondering for a moment. They're intentionally telling a story where the white person, Agent Ross, helps the Black people, as opposed to the other way around, where it's always the Black sidekick helping the white main character, right? Like Lando Calrissian in Star Wars, right? So the role reversal there is important as well.
Well, I mean, I agree with you, but the point for me is, once you get past Wakanda and Wakanda Forever, it's empty. Why would I bother seeing anything else? There's no philosophical, moral context. So anyway, I'll stop preaching.
And I think some of that remains to be seen. So, like, Phase 4 of the MCU has received a lot of criticism, and some of it justified. Some of the plots are not as interesting, or the acting is not necessarily as solid, right? But the themes in that Phase 4 are interesting. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens as now Phase 5 transitions, and whether those themes get played out, or if Phase 4 is the anomaly. So I think the question is Phase 4 the anomaly here in terms of the themes, or is Phase 4 sort of the setup for a much larger conversation in Phase 5? So the issues of diversity that we see in Phase 4, for instance, what will happen to those in phase 5? So I know a lot of people slam Captain Marvel, for instance. I like Captain Marvel. My kids like Captain Marvel. Like, they're teenagers and they like this film. And they are very curious to see what's going to happen with the next film, The Marvels, and whether it actually plays out as we hope it will versus what actually happens. So yes, I have my skeptical hat on too, Tom. Definitely. At the same time, I want to see what happens. I want to see where it goes. So the other side is the danger of burnout, right? So like right now, Marvel is just churning out stuff. It's like Star Wars, just churning out tons of stuff. And so this is about money. But at some point, the audience is going to be on overload. And I think for a lot of the audience, they're already on overload. And so we'll see what happens. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my kids are behind. I mean, they're very behind on their MCU watching. So we'll see. All right. So that was a good question. Alan.
First of all, is my microphone working? Can you hear me?
I can hear you great.
Two things. One, Tom, I think comics in general, but also the MCU has always been a mixture of things that go boom, and which is like the 14-year-old boy in me, which like, but then also some relatively deep social commentary. The whole Superman has fascinating origins about patriotism and but also what does it mean to be a hero and all those kinds of things. Like there's like even in the end game pairing of movies, like the question of, okay, what is the right response to resource scarcity? Like that's an interesting question, but how it plays out, whatever. The thing though that struck me as I was watching Wakanda Forever that I'm not sure you quite mentioned, Steve, that maybe you did, but you were sort of making an analogy of like preemptive strike, for example, as an analogy to the US. And I'm not sure that my personal take is I'm not sure that any of it's an analogy to the US. The thing that I found fascinating is the Western world is essentially an afterthought character. Like, yeah. So like even in the first one, like there was one dude who did not have an African accent. Even the bad guy had a South African accent. Like, so that like the African centric and the indigenous people centricness of it is huge. Which where I went with that is the core question of Wakanda Forever is what is the right response of indigenous people to colonialism? And most significantly, what does it mean to be a good indigenous person? Right? Are you like Wakanda and play nicely with all the world's powers and do the little thing, even if they're bad to you, do you still try and make peace? Or do you say, no, we're going to actually wage war on you and fight back as an indigenous, marginalized people, and use our power in a way that, doesn't fall into line with, well, you're not the good Mexican or the good Black person. And so that central question is really, that's not an analogy to anybody in the West, which I think is what makes it fundamentally interesting, especially as like a white guy watching. It's like, oh, this isn't about me, actually. Like this conversation is not Western centric. It's not white people centric. And it's a fascinating window into like, oh, this is a thing that I'm not normally privy to. And so that's what I found really interesting playing out.
No, I think that's right. I was trying to make the parallel between the CIA and the Western nations trying to get to Wakanda and then to the other vibranium, right? Yep. Like it's just replicating the colonial pillaging stuff.
Sure.
The larger question of what you do with power applies to both groups. But the other piece in this, and I was reading something on this the other day, that Wakanda Forever suggests what often happens is you have they what I was reading was black on brown violence, right? So you have the white power that then pits persons of color against themselves, right? So the threat of Namor to Wakanda that says you will fight with me against them or I'll fight you, and the same thing where then Ramonda threatens Namor back and says, no, we're not going to do this, or I will fight you. So the true enemy in the film is the Western power, but it's Wakanda and Talokan that are fighting each other because they're trying to figure out how to deal with the Western power, right? Like that's the narrative. So you're right, Alan. I mean, like that's what's going on. And so, but understanding it not on a national level necessarily, but on the reality of this is what often persons of color struggle with. Who are we loyal to? Who's the real enemy? Like, and they're fighting among themselves when that is not going to help them, right? But if in the film, the West can pillage the resources and turn them against each other, so much the better. Yep. Other questions, things you want to ask? Because I think I'm looking at Enton. We think we should do breakout rooms or take a little break. Breakout rooms, okay. So we have maybe one more question. If anyone wants to ask one right now. Let me ask the question: are these the films you watched? Always like to test and say, like. No. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think we want to do a little breakout activity here. So Anton, if you can get ready to put some folks in rooms. I had a couple questions for you to think about. You can certainly talk on whatever you want to talk about. We'll just do like 10 minutes in the breakout rooms. So one of them is one question to consider is, how is Wakanda presented as the ideal? So if Wakanda is this idealized society, what's really ideal about it, right? So that would be one question. The second question would be, how should Wakanda respond to the rest of the world? Like if you're on the Wakandan council, do you go with Killmonger? Do you go with T'Challa? Do you go with Shuri? Do you go with Nakia? Like how should in fact Wakanda respond to the rest of the world? Third, and I like this question myself because I think it's a very challenging one to answer. What does allegiance to Wakanda actually mean? So at different points in the film, you have people talking about, I'm loyal to that throne, Okoye says, or I'm loyal to this ideal or whatever. So what does loyalty, allegiance actually mean in the film? And then I think the last question is, how do the films depict African experience, African diaspora experience, and African American experience? And they are not the same, right? So African diaspora, and African American. So whatever question you want to engage with in your group or questions, I encourage you to feel free to do that. Those are just suggestions. If you want to talk about other things, go right ahead. But those were some questions that I thought would be helpful in thinking about some stimulating conversation. So Enton, if you can load us up in some breakout rooms, and we'll set about 10 minutes. Let's go 12. Can we do 12, Enton? Is that okay?
Why don't we go to 10 minutes after the hour?
Okay. All right.
How does that sound?
That sounds great. So that's almost 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Let's do 15 minutes in our breakout rooms, and then we'll come back at that point. Thank you.
And we'll come back, and then we'll also have a break shortly thereafter. I think we'll do some debriefing first. So an explanation about breakout rooms, of putting you 4 to a room. Colleen, I'm putting both logins in the same room so you can be together. You Wenatchee folks, because there's a group of you, I've created you in your own breakout room so you get to talk around the table. And I'd rather mix things up a little bit. I don't know how to divide you all up when you're on one Zoom login. Does that make sense to you all? Okay, good. So I'm going to start the breakout rooms. I've posted all 4 questions in the chat so you can refer to them. any questions before I trigger the breakout rooms? Great. Here you go. Well, Steve, I think we're all coming back in and people are getting connected. So I'm going to turn it back over to you for a little bit of discussion before we take a break.
All right, very good. Thanks, Enton. Hopefully you all had some good conversation in your breakout rooms. So there were about 4 different groups. So curious to hear back in terms of if you focused on a particular question and what comments you made, what insights you have, what further questions you want to pursue, or if you just talked about other stuff. So if each group could sort of report back in and say, this is what we talked about, or these are the questions we have, that'd be great.
We liked your comment, Steve, about what would colonialism have been like had we worked together to build a better world with the Native Americans, or you name the group, rather than we want the resource for us, our way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, both films definitely go directly at that question.
Something that I brought up was, can you have a utopia that's a grandiose civilization like this, like the Egyptians or anything like that, or Wakanda? Does a utopia have to be small and communal, or can it be huge and hierarchical?
Mm-hmm. Right, because even within Wakanda, there's clearly a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other?
One comment was, if you don't like some of the themes, just watch for the beautiful costumes.
Indeed. Yeah, if you're really into that Dreams of Wakanda book is really interesting. Goes into a lot of detail around the different aesthetic designs and choices that were made. All right, we'll hear from another group.
Yeah, let's go to the group with Alan, Colleen, Connie, and Elsie.
That's helpful. Thank you. Yes, who would like to say a word or two?
Well, we talked a little bit about actually the mechanism by which you become Black Panther and the relationships that has in terms of is this a theological thing? Is this a biological lineage thing? Is this a political thing? And how do those play out both for the individual and for the society? And yeah, what does it mean to have that right to become that person?
Mm-hmm.
Is an interesting question.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the most fascinating characters to me is Okoye, in terms of how she understands who she is in relationship to this idealized Wakanda. And so for her, Killmonger is legitimate when she thinks that T'Challa is dead. He won technically in the fight, and he is of royal descent. So he meets the criteria, right?
Mm-hmm.
For being king and thus being the Black Panther. She doesn't like it, but those are the rules. And as soon as T'Challa shows back up and is not dead, what's she say? The king lives.
Mm.
And so then all bets are off and she's back on T'Challa's side, right? Like immediately.
Right.
And so it's just such an interesting character to think from her perspective, what does faithfulness mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. Which we didn't talk about this, but also the last comment brought it up in my thinking too. The whole concept of Wakanda as a utopia has some very interesting and strong parallels for me to, well, in my personal lineage, the various Mennonite groups who have tried to create their own colonies, particularly German Russian colonies, which is where my biology comes from, and or even ones now in Bolivia and Paraguay. And boy, howdy, you want to think about them as a parallel to Wakanda, and that's a rabbit hole.
That sounds like a research paper.
Nah, but I'm not in your class, man.
I know, but it still sounds like a good research paper.
I'm not saying I won't write it.
Yeah, but that is, especially with isolationism, right?
Right. I mean, or even, I mean, you could, okay, in the Brethren Church, you could take the effort to colonies, right? Like, I mean, it's the same idea of forget y'all, like literally, we don't care what the rest of the world does. We're going to play in our own corner, which, I mean, if you want to get into the pacifist question, like the shift from non-resistance to non-violence in the 20th century, like prior to that, our understanding of non-violence was we're going to do our own thing, just don't ask us to be in the military, right? Like, which is very Wakandan. Right. So yeah.
Interesting stuff. Thank you, Adeline. Oh, our next group.
So Carolyn, Joyce, Sarah, and Alan.
Well, Carolyn brought up a really interesting perspective, and I'll let her share more about it, but the conflict in Sudan. Do you want to share about that, Carolyn?
Carolyn, you're still muted, so we want to hear what you're saying.
Thank you. I haven't seen the movies, but just from what you mentioned in the conversation about the movies, made me think of divergent groups, or in South Sudan, tribes who have for centuries, forever, been at each other's throats fighting. But when there was a common enemy, the government of the North, they would band together and get along, and succeeded in their fight. And I said, while that was going on, but when the common enemy is gone, they'll be back fighting each other. And that has proven to be true. So it's just one other comment from South Sudan, as far as the I've lost the word. Colonialism. That theme seems to have been in these movies. Of course, the Brits were the colonists, but there's a section of South Sudan who claims they were never ever colonized. They were never ever under the Brits, and they were very proud of that. But negative feelings toward the colonists from the Africans, but not in my experience there. After independence, the colonists were, I mean, it wasn't a terrible hate toward the colonists. It had subdued some, I'm sure. The current situation is they are an independent country, but they are being colonized again by China for the purpose of all of the things that the Chinese can take away: lumber, gold, oil, all these things.
Yeah, the resources.
Yeah, the resources. So that I'd be interested to know more about the colonization angle in this movies. So you've inspired me to watch them.
Well, good. Thank you. Other comments from that group before we get to the last group? Okay, our final group then?
And that would be Jamie, Joyce and Dick, Sharon, and Tom.
Well, I'll just say 2 words then. We just followed a little bit like Carolyn. We talked, we talked about those final scenes in Wakanda Forever, where I mean, you addressed this, Steve, where they're fighting each other, but who's the real enemy? And I'll just bring to this group what my impression was, and the others can say whatever. But just like a lot of the movie reminded me of how the white slavers used different African groups to do the enslaving, but precisely because they wanted them infighting, knowing that they'd be, when they're divided, they'd be of no account overall. And so I don't know if you agree with that view, but anyway, so it's just like sort of speaking of truth there about how, you need to think carefully about who your real enemy is.
Right.
And then maybe Jamie or one of the others has something else.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Is there more to add or to say there? Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to suggest then that we're sitting for a little while. So let's take a little break and then stretch, and then we'll come back and have some final comments. I might show a clip or two to sort of reinforce a thing or two, and then we'll look to wrap it up after our short break. So, Enton?
Yeah, since we're short on time, let's try to come back as close to 25 after as you can. I know that's more like 3.5 minutes, but if you're not quite back, we'll do a slow start. But if you can be back by 25 or 26 after, then we'll have a good solid half an hour to wrap things up.
Sounds good.
Feel free to just mute your mic or mute your camera, but leave your connection open and we'll still be here.
Enton,
Yes, Sharon.
can you hear me? And yeah, your instructions were sure correct about viewing some of these films ahead, but the session has really stirred my imagination, and now I want to go back and see with this information and see what I think about it.
It's
That's it.
true. It gives you a whole nother way to think about these films.
Yes.
All I can think of is what is it, Bilbo or Frodo or whatever it is. I did that was sort of distracting.
Steve, we don't have your sound. Not sure. I saw you on mute, but your mic was.
How about now?
Got it.
Okay. Weird. Tom, I didn't catch the last part of what you said. I heard Frodo and Bilbo.
Yeah, I said my association with those two characters made that CIA guy, right? The association was distracting.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, that's one of his more famous roles. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we're starting to come back together. Those of you that are coming back from break, looking forward to joining the conversation again. And Steve, maybe we'll just sort of do a soft start and take comments as they come, and then let you keep rolling.
Sounds good. So thanks everyone. I hope that this has been enjoyable. I'll put in the shameless plug here. So I teach this course in the fall, science fiction and theology, that Enton named, and it's every other fall. And so this is the fall I teach it. And so it includes Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, The Matrix quadrilogy now, and also, of course, Black Panther. And so thinking about the ways in which, again, I started by saying theology is all around us, and it is all around us. And science fiction in particular, as a genre, asks a lot of interesting theological questions about the nature of existence, God, life after death, all these kind of things. And so science fiction is ripe for this sort of conversation, and also what the world could be or what the world should be. So this questioning of reality, why is this the world it is? Could we have a different world? That is certainly a factor within science fiction. And so I like this genre because of the questions that it asks. It asks us to ask about our present. Why not this? Why that? And so for me, that's a gain. So I teach this class in the fall. It's a weekend intensive with a Zoom option, and auditors are always welcome. So if you're interested in auditing the class, don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to see what that might look like. Also, we have a newer faculty member here at the seminary, Tamisha Tyler, who her PhD work is on Afrofuturism. And so that's a genre of things that looks at alternative futures in which Black people are thriving and not marginalized. And so Black Panther fits into that category of Afrofuturism. And so her dissertation was related to that, and she will teach Afrofuturism and theology in the spring of 24, also as a weekend intensive with the Zoom option. And auditors are welcome. So if that interests you, continuing that kind of thinking interests you, those are two classes at Bethany that are right at your doorstep that are available. So just thought I'd plug that. And if anyone has questions later, happy to answer those or to take questions about how one might do that thing. Also, if you're going to annual conference this summer, Dr. Tyler and I will be co-leading a session on Afrofuturism and world building. And so one of the insights sessions, equipping sessions in the book, you'll see it's listed in there. I think it's under world building in the title, and we'll talk about how we can imagine differently what the world could be like. And so looking forward to that particular session. I thought I would start our time here before we turn to some open-ended questions with at least two clips from the film. And so I want to share my screen and do it correctly. That would be good. All right. Okay, can everyone see the film there, T'Challa? Okay, Enton, great. Okay, so hopefully this comes through on the audio. So this is the scene near the end of the film where T'Challa has come back and he has gone back to the ancestral plane and he is encountering his father. And it is an intense exchange between T'Challa and his dad.
Why didn't you bring the boy home? Why, Baba? He was the truth I chose to omit. You were wrong to abandon him. I chose my people. I chose Wakanda. Our future depended on... You are wrong! All of you are wrong! To turn your backs on the rest of the world! We let the fear of our discovery stop us from doing what is right. No more. I cannot stay here with you. I cannot rest where he sits on the throne. He's a monster of our own making. I must take the mantle back. I must right these wrongs.
So in this scene, right, T'Challa confronts his father. Why didn't you take the boy home? And the response is, he was the truth I chose to omit. And for me, that is such a powerful line, that we all have these truths that we wish was not the case, right? Like, and so we leave it out. We skip over it. That's not the history we tell. That's the thing we'd rather ignore. That's burying something that we choose to say, I'm just not going to go there. But the reality is we have to go there. We have to deal with it, right? We have to address the wrong, the bad decision, thing that has been problematic. To simply abandon it, to ignore it, to pretend it didn't happen, only makes things worse. And then the accountability that comes around that. So it's just a powerful line about, this is the truth I chose to admit. And then T'Challa says, where you were wrong. And again, T'Chaka tries to defend himself and say, I chose my people, right? I chose Wakanda. And again, T'Challa says, but you were wrong because you let the fear of our discovery prevent us from doing what was right. Right? So self-preservation is not the goal. Protecting their way of life is not the goal. Doing what is right is the goal. Even if it meant they may have been discovered, they may have been in jeopardy, whatever, but choosing the protectionism, and that's how the film starts, is the protectionism of Wakanda. To choose protectionism is the wrong choice. And then I also like in his speech to his father, he's a monster of our own making. So he doesn't blame the conditions in LA. He doesn't blame, the history of colonialism. He's a monster of our own making. They could have done something different. The Wakandans could have made a different choice. And now they are reaping the consequences of their choice on how they dealt with Killmonger when he was just a boy. So there's something about owning your choices, right? Claiming responsibility, not passing the buck, and saying, we did this. This was our fault. There's something powerful in that. And so then T'Challa, out of that sense of wanting to make it right, goes and takes back the throne from Killmonger. And it, of course, is successful. As we then jump, so I'm going to pause there for a second. So comments, questions, reflections on that particular scene. Okay, I want to share another clip then, and this will jump to the end of the film, where he's at the UN. Okay, got it queued up here. So they go to the UN, and this is in one of the post-credit scenes.
My name is King T'Challa, son of King T'Chaka. I am the sovereign ruler of the nation of Wakanda. And for the first time in our history, we will be sharing our knowledge and resources with the outside world. Wakanda will no longer watch from the shadows. We cannot. We must not. We will work to be an example of how we as brothers and sisters on this earth should treat each other. Now more than ever, the illusions of division threaten our very existence. We all know the truth. More connects us than separates us. But in times of crisis, the wise build bridges, while the foolish build barriers. We must find a way to look after one another as if we were one single tribe.
With all due respect, King T'Challa, What can a nation of farmers have to offer the rest of the world?
Of course, the perception of the rest of the world is that Wakanda is this backwards agrarian culture, and they're hiding their true identity right from everyone. But this speech that T'Challa makes here, of course, I mentioned earlier sort of the anti-Trump rhetoric. This is clearly a dig at Trump's policies around building the border wall and those sort of pieces. And so, the wise build bridges, but the foolish build barriers, right? And that there's more that unites us than separates us, and this kind of language that we find here at the end of the film, to think about what the responsibility, again, of Wakanda is to the rest of the world. And so they will have this two-pronged approach where Nakia does the social aid and Shuri does the technological aid, right, out from Wakanda to share resources, to share insights, rather than to hoard them or to go in isolation. In my opinion, it's unfortunate that Endgame happened before this, or happens after this film, before the second film, because you don't really get to see Wakanda do this in a way that's not unaffected by the blip. And so the loss of half of the world's population and all of the chaos that happens because of that then affects what Wakanda does in terms of its outreach. And then, as Ari mentioned at the beginning, the death of Chadwick Boseman certainly affects the whole plot line. But the reality, I think, that Wakanda Forever suggests is, can we ever actually overcome our desire to take advantage of other people? Can we ever actually transcend the human seemingly inherent propensity to take advantage of others and to want their resources in ways that are inappropriate without actually just taking them over? So the opening scenes in Wakanda Forever, where they're clearly trying to raid Wakandan outreach centers for their vibranium, will we ever be at a place that we can get past this? Because this is who we are, I think the film seems to say. So maybe a little bit of skepticism in the film around human nature as well. But this goal, this ideal that T'Challa puts forward to say that we are going to share our resources, we are not going to remain in isolation anymore. So it's a very interesting speech that he makes there at the end of Black Panther. Comments, thoughts, reflections on that particular speech or those ideas?
Utopian.
Yes, it feels very utopian at the end, right? Of course, Wakanda is going to just lay it all out there and it's going to be great. People are going to be receptive to it. There won't be any struggle. Yep. Certainly feels very idealized.
That the lion will lie down with the lamb.
Indeed. Oh, that one day would be true. I'd love to see it. Of course. All right, further comments, thoughts? I'm going to pause there. We have about 20 minutes left. So questions, things you want to comment on or probe, or other related things that you might want to talk about?
You said that Endgame was in between the two Black Panther films,
Yes.
and that to watch Endgame would help us understand the Wakanda Forever.
It would help you understand one aspect of the context for what happens in Wakanda Forever. So let me briefly sketch. Endgame is a very long film. mean, really long film. And you have to watch, I think, both Infinity War and Endgame to really know what's going on. So that's like a 5.5 hour commitment probably to both of those films.
That's the other 12.
And what ends up happening is this godlike entity, Thanos, collects these Infinity Stones, and with a snap of his fingers, he makes half of the universe's population disappear. Not just on Earth, but all across the universes, half of the population's gone. And so the world is thrown into turmoil. And this lasts not just for a month, this lasts for 5 years. And so because it's so long before the effects are undone, and then they're not completely undone, before this happens, the world suffers through 5 years of this. And so when Wakanda Forever happens, the half of the population has come back, but the other half remembers them being gone, and the conditions are still in this chaotic state. And so Wakanda Forever occurs after these horrific events happen at the end of Endgame and the chaos that ensues. And so in that context, right, in terms of global crisis, what is Wakanda's responsibility to aid? And now you're talking really about the pillaging of resources, because it's not just an existential threat of alien invasion, it's a real threat, right? And so the United States, at one point, the CIA director basically says, I dream about what I could do with vibranium, right? Like, she wants to have the power that vibranium gives, because then she can do stuff with it, right? She can make the world do what the United States wants. And so that's really explicit in Wakanda Forever. And so to get a sense of the severity of that, I think is important. But both Infinity War and Endgame, I will just tell you, are long and very violent.
Thanks.
Enton and I were having this conversation about violence during the breakout rooms, and just thinking about how the films, some of them are much more violent than others, and some of them, are more grotesque than others, or gory than others. Some of it is, your typical sci-fi violence, but just the ways in which not all films are created equal in terms of the violence that it depicts. The MCU is very violent. Alan?
I don't know. Maybe I'm just jaded, but I would push back just a little bit on the violence. Yes, there is violence, but there's a fundamental difference to me. I mean, the MCU still thinks of itself as family movies. And so this is not like Saving Private Ryan, which is where you do see actual blood spatter. There's no blood spatter anywhere in the MCU, right? You see people getting hit and blown up, but you don't see the graphic violence that exists in a whole lot of other media out there right now. And so
that is true.
I mean, it's just not that the people in this room are looking for a lot of violent content, but be aware there's ways in which MCU is fairly tame.
Yeah. At the same time, it certainly does celebrate often violence in a way that is
I mean, it's still in the same way that Transformers is a commercial for GM in the military, right? The myth of redemptive violence is strong. Right? That's the underlying thing, is that if we are bigger and badder and more powerful and we're the good ones, then we will defeat the other. So I mean, pacifist Alan has got issues.
But that combination of self-sacrifice and redemptive violence, those two things, just hand in hand through the whole, all of it, right? Yeah. Other comments or thoughts? a side comment there is, as much as we might want this not to be the case, this stuff is incredibly popular. And so recognizing how culturally pervasive this view is its own point, right? So thinking about the ways in which, and I think the same is true with other franchises like Harry Potter, for instance, or the Hunger Games, when those were like everywhere, right? You had a whole generation that was raised on that. The MCU is so pervasive, thinking about the influences that it has across not just one generation, but multiple generations, and how it, the themes that it puts forward as ideals, I would say. So, Joyce?
Yeah, I am just wondering a couple things. One, do people really see the depth of this film, or are they just entertained by the violence? That would be one question. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that you would know the answer to that. Another question I would have is, with violence becoming such a good sell in this country, we're from Minneapolis. We're seeing an awfully lot of violence here, and I think every other big city is seeing a lot of violence. And what is this doing to our culture?
Yeah. So the first question, I mean, I don't have any scientific data to support one way or another. It's fascinating to me that these films, particularly Black Panther, go there, and not in a subtle way, but in a really direct way. So like, I didn't show you the clip of the museum scene where Killmonger's in the museum and basically says, so where'd you get all this? Oh, that's right, you plundered everything, right? So there's the bluntness of some of this that is really direct. And so if you're sitting in the theater and you are actually listening to the dialogue, that's also part of the challenge, right? It's usually the dialogue. So you're listening to the dialogue and you go, oh, I never really thought about that. Where do museums get their stuff, right? Like, or how did that end up in the British Museum, right? So I mean, they're doing it in some of those things in a very direct way. Now, does some of this go over many people's heads? Absolutely. Do other people notice it? Yes, they do. It depends on, are you going to this film to just be entertained, to check out for 2.5 hours, or are you paying attention to what the film is actually doing and saying, right? So some of it depends on the investment of the audience in the film itself. So that sort of is one piece. It certainly drew enough attention that, you know, people are writing about it and publishing on it, and not just in technical scholarly places, but in more widely popular stuff too. So that's always a good sign. What is it doing to the culture? I think, you know, part of me would say that it's just desensitizing us. I mean, it's the school shootings, right? Oh, it's another school shooting. Like, you get numb to it over time pretty easily, I would say. And then there's always it has to be bigger or better, right? So it's not enough that the violence or the plot line does this, it has to one up the thing that came before it. And so there certainly is, I think, a factor of that going on. Again, and tonight we're talking a little bit like the first Doctor Strange film. Love the first Doctor Strange film in the MCU. Very interesting, the tension between the material world and the spiritual world, thinking about the nature of reality, the way in which the clever solution is proposed at the end of the problem. I mean, all the film is just really interesting. Doctor Strange 2, my opinion is it's one of the worst films in the whole thing. Like, it's just terrible. And so, yeah, Alan's going to disagree. It's just terrible. Like, my kids hated it, just absolutely hated the film. And so like, what they do to one of the characters, the gore that's in the film is not really gory, but for the MCU, it's more gory. And so just thinking about the ways in which your expectations of going into the film also shape kind of what you get out of it, right? But in this particular instance, for some reason, that kind of violence is really, really selling in our culture. It just is. this is the reality of our culture right now. And so how do we think about engaging that conversation in a productive way and possibly proposing alternatives to a violent solution? Because the violent solution is often the solution. And in many science fiction films, it's all about redemptive violence, right? Blowing up the Death Star. It's all about redemptive violence. But then are there other ways of changing that narrative? And so at the end of Wakanda Forever, the Wakandans are all going to die. They're going to die at the hands of the Takalan until Shuri is willing to forgive. When Shuri is willing to forgive, that's how the cycle is broken. And so that's it, right? And so do the people watching this film understand that? Did they get it? I don't know. But that's the story that this film tells. And so hopefully the message is getting across. It's a great question.
Thank
Two
you.
great questions.
Just a note, Steve. I have a friend who has seen every single one of these movies in order with all 5 of his sons.
Yep.
A family tradition sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, and my kids, they're teenagers. I have one in college and 2 in just graduated high school actually this weekend. Craziness. So the 3 of them and I make it a regular habit of seeing these things together, whether in the theater or on Disney Plus. Like we sit down and watch them together. We were watching, so funny. We were watching Eternals, which many people do not like the film Eternals. I like it because it's one of the most theologically interesting films in the MCU. It's boring, but it is very theologically interesting. And so at one point in the film, all 3 of them in the aisle go at the dialogue because then they're looking down at me because they know what's going on is theologically relevant. And they're like, Dad, I assume that you're going to be talking about this in your class because they know that I do this class. And so they were paying attention and they knew, I mean, they're my kids, but they knew enough to know that what was just said was theologically interesting. So some people are seeing it and hearing it.
Unfortunately, there probably aren't too many parents out there like you.
Yeah, well, that could be a good thing or a bad thing, I guess. But it is interesting that my kids they know enough, right? They know enough to pay attention to that. So, all right, we are getting close to time here, about 5 minutes till. So any further comments, things you want to ask about, things in the MCU, approaching films theologically? Not just sci-fi?
One question, Steve, I have, when, and maybe Anton more knows, when will this video, that we just experienced, be available for us to share with other members of the church?
Thanks for that question. I have a question for Steve about this, because part of the problem is Steve played copyrighted clips. If I trim those from the recording, then the recording will successfully post, but we'll miss some of the content. If I don't trim those, I don't think I can actually get it to post on YouTube.
Well, it depends. YouTube might flag it. Maybe. If you cut it out, I mean, that's just how it is.
So I think that I'll probably need to cut them out to try to do that, and I'll try to get it posted within the next 48 hours.
Yeah, YouTube depends a little bit on the length of the clips, but yeah. Because there certainly is enough stuff on YouTube that is questionable, but yeah.
I'll try to post it with it, Steve, and
see if it catches it.
But if so, then I'll have to do a re-editing process. So we'll see. I'll do my best.
No, I get that. Yeah. That's a great question, though. Yeah, and the copyright things, I mean, this is also Disney, so, you know, they're notorious for their copyright stuff.
We're trying to use this under fair use educational policy, so that's what would technically apply. but YouTube doesn't pay attention to those things until after you do multiple appeals.
Yeah, no, that is, yes, I know. Yes. Experience that one.
Disney has better lawyers than you do.
Yeah, well, and a few more. Other comments, questions, things to ask about?
Steve, I was just going to put in a plug for taking anybody who's interested in taking your class. I mean, I've done that in the past. The thing that I don't know if you've said this at any point in this thing, but this conversation about science fiction and theology is part of a much bigger skill set that I think everybody in church needs to have the ability of. The technical term is cultural hermeneutics, but like the point, the basic, this is one exercise in, if you want to be able to talk with somebody who cares about a particular area of culture that's different than your own, then you have to at least have some knowledge and understanding of what they care about to be able to make theological connections to. Like, so this is the same, I mean, Carolyn's here too. Like, so the ability to look at an MCU movie and talk with somebody who cares about that first and say, hey, what do you think about the theology of this? And have that conversation. That's the same skill set as Carolyn would use in Sudan to understand whatever culture that, you know, of the people that you've talked with, and then to use that to be able to have conversations with. So like, it's worth taking if you're a nerd like me, but like, in terms of like the practice of, hey, I'm going to try and understand a thing that I maybe don't understand at first, and then analyze it to the point that, oh, well, maybe I can have a conversation with my grandson who really does love Iron Man. Right. And so like, that's what's going on here. And that's worth saying.
Well, thank you for that, Alan. And the skill set is definitely transferable. And just, you know, the whole testimonial bit, like the first time I taught this class, which was a while back, I had one student who took the class. I always ask, you know, why are you taking this class? That sort of thing. What do you want to get out of it? And so when we got around to this particular student, she was like, I don't know anything about science fiction. I want to talk to my kid. My son lives and breathes this stuff. I want to talk to him. She did. Right? She entered his world, the stuff he cares about, like Alan was saying. And I think that goes a long way. And you can have conversations in a way that's very unexpected because you've shown that kind of care and investment in it. So you don't have to learn how to speak Klingon, you know, Star Trek language. That's okay. But being able to engage in a productive conversation with folks, I think is very valuable. And again, to Alan's point of the transferability, this goes not just for science fiction, but it's literature, right? It's music. It's the ways in which all different media talk about our world and what is and what should be. And so the kinds of questions that you learn by doing this, the ways of seeing and reading and hearing things, totally transferable to other genres. And I think that's also an important piece here. This is not just about Black Panther or just about the MCU or just about science fiction. It's about how we see theology all around us. Keeping your eyes open and paying attention. So yes.
That seems like a really fitting conclusion to our course. We've reached our time. Steve, I'll give you the chance to say a few more things, but just looking around the virtual room, is there any last burning question that you need to ask before we bring things to a close tonight? Okay. Thank you for that last piece of cultural hermeneutics, because that helped bring the whole thing into a circle for me and really made this important. But Steve, go ahead and wrap us up then for the course.
Thanks, and thank you all for participating in this. I do hope that it stimulated your interest that it caused you to ask some questions that you may not have, and hopefully a desire to engage maybe in material that you haven't spent time in, because it is a wider cultural conversation phenomenon. So I would like to just thank Enton for his good work in preparing for this, and the time and energy that goes into making it all happen, and each of you for the time to come and participate in this, to pay attention, to ask good questions, and to engage the material. So thank you. It's much better from a presenter view when you all are invested, if it's not just me delivering content. So the engagement is really, really helpful and satisfying. So I would like to close us in a prayer, if that is good. So let's pause, and I will offer a closing prayer. Gracious God, we are thankful to be together through technology that allows us to bridge distance. We are thankful for this world that you have made, and the ways in which we are part of making it the world that you desire. I pray for each of us that you keep our eyes open, that you help us to ask questions, that you allow us to see where you are working, and may we be part of the creation of a new world that looks like your kingdom, that looks like how we should be and what we are intended to be. May your Spirit be with us. May you continue to guide and to lead us. May we hear your voice. In Christ's name, amen. Thank you, one and all.
And Steve, thank you so much. We are so appreciative of your taking time to be with these ventures and Christian discipleship courses, and we'll look forward to you leading another one again.
That would be great. This is my second one. So yeah, it's always a good time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being a part of the course tonight.
Thank you, both of you.